My name is Spherno, and welcome back to the Fruit Bowl cast. Today, we're going to be tackling power rankings for Week 13. We had a really interesting weekend, a lot of fun matches, a lot of reverse sweeps, and some interesting placements that I've got here on my list to tackle this week. So let's get right into them. I'm going to start from the bottom, and I'm going to work my way up, just because I think, that's a lot of fun to do. So, coming in at my number 20 spot is going to be the Vancouver Titans. They've had a lot of turmoil recently. They just released all of their players, and right now they're in a position where we don't really know what's going to happen to them. We don't know who they're going to sign for their match next week, and honestly, I think it's a game that their opponents, the Washington Justice, will be able to win without a problem. Coming in at the number 19 spot is actually going to be the Washington Justice. So, my reasoning for putting them here above the Boston, or below the Boston Uprising, when everybody would mostly expect them to be taking that bottom spot, is that in last week's matches, Washington Justice did play the Dallas Fuel. And although it ended the way we thought it would, with Dallas coming out on top in a 3-0, Washington Justice just didn't put up much of a fight at all. It's like they're not even trying anymore. Whereas my number 18 spot, the Boston Uprising, look like they're showing just a few signs of life. They're starting to play a little bit better. They did come back against Florida in their game against the Mayhem, so I was pretty proud of them for that. It looks like they're kind of starting to get a roll on. Maybe it's just the release of Echo, something that's motivated them to play better, and it's doing good for the Uprising, but it was more than enough to pull them out of the number 20 spot. Coming up next is a team that I think their ranking will change after this weekend, seeing as they're finally coming back to the league, is going to be the London Spitfire. I don't really have a huge motivation for putting them here, other than that they haven't played any games in a while, so there's really no data to gather for them, and therefore I can't place them any higher than number 16. But from what I've seen in the games that they have played, I believe they've played a lot better than either of these three teams. So coming in at number 15 is going to be the Toronto Defiant. They finally worked their way into the mid-tier. I'm pretty proud of them for that. They had a game against the Los Angeles Gladiators that ended in a 3-1. The Defiant putting up a pretty good showing against the Gladiators, and the Gladiators supposed to be one of these really awesome teams, one of the best teams in the league, and they looked like they were struggling a bit against the Defiant. Of course, they finally put themselves together for the end, but, it's always those rocky starts that you've kind of got to go off of. So right above Toronto is a team that unfortunately has had the worst fall from glory the past couple of weeks, the Paris Eternal. Earlier in the year, I would have put them up here, top 5, top 10, somewhere up there, but recently, they're looking worse and worse. Their game against the Philadelphia Fusion was a 3-0 in which, Paris Eternal, they've looked pretty good against these opponents, against the Philadelphia Fusion, but they lost in such a devastating fashion. I mean, they couldn't even get a good foothold on any of these maps, and, they stave off a reverse sweep again. The Philadelphia Fusion staving off a reverse sweep. It wasn't a 3-0 like I originally thought. Just looked it up. That's okay. We all make mistakes. But Paris Eternal, again, even though they've put up a kind of good showing, they're just not doing good anymore. They lost to the Florida Mayhem. They're losing more and more games to the Fusion. And while that could just be a sign that the Fusion are getting infinitely better, I'd love to think that Paris just aren't up to the level that we thought they were anymore. Next up above them is a team that, who else are you going to put here? The Houston Outlaws. We've seen them play a little bit, and they win a couple games, they lose a bunch of games, and they're just kind of an average team. There's nothing special about them, there's nothing super great or super bad about them, so putting them kind of in the middle here on this bracket seems like the best choice. Right above them is another team that, kind of shocking that they're not doing good anymore, is the Seoul Dynasty, and I think a lot of that just has to do with overhype. We hyped them up at the beginning of the season, and when we finally saw them, they did really good, but now they're showing us their true colors, and I think it's just a 2019 London Spitfire thing, that the players they signed are just not consistent, and this is one of those metas that I think it has to do a lot with Echo, and Echo just not being one of their strong points, and they're definitely suffering for it, so they're going to go right above Houston. Finally making their way into some of the higher tier teams, I'm going to call them, is the Florida Mayhem. They fought hard, and they deserve this. They're going to be placed, they're dropping a little bit because of Boston Uprising's comeback against them a little bit. They looked like they weren't playing too confidently in some of those maps against the Uprising, but overall they're playing a lot better. They beat Paris, a weakened Paris at that, but they're still starting to win more games. And as long as they can keep, I guess, getting wins against some of these lower tier teams, then they should be okay to stay where they are. And if they manage to get a win up on some of these other teams up top, then there might even be a cause to bring them up a bit. So right above the Florida Mayhem are going to be the Chengdu Hunters. Sure, the Florida Mayhem are winning more games, but the Hunters are playing more fun games. They're experimenting, and even if they lose, they still look confident in what they're playing, and they still look like it's not so much a they're lost issue as it is just the other teams outclass them. Because if you look above, a lot of the teams that they've played are still remaining to be placed in my top 10. So, I mean, when you're left with facing teams, or you're left facing a schedule as tough as this, you kind of expect these losses to come through. But I think if these guys start playing some of these lower tier teams, we could see them start to get a better win record. And speaking of having a tough schedule but still getting a good win record, it's going to be the Los Angeles Valiant. These guys are playing so much better now, and I'm really happy to give them this number 11 spot. They really deserve it. They've worked hard for it. Wait, this isn't 11. They're in my top 10. How could that have happened? Honestly, they deserve it. Finally making top 10, finally being in contention for the playoffs, or the play-ins, simply because, I mean, they're getting better. They played a game against the Atlanta Reign, and they completely reverse swept the Reign. Now, sure, some of that is on the Reign for not playing at their best, and maybe being a little overhyped, and you'll see them drop in my power rankings a little bit this weekend, but the Valiant are seeming to come on strong, especially now that they're playing Shax and Apply more often instead of just KSP, KSF, and they're starting to experiment with their roster a bit more. They're finding that a lot of their players have strong points that we didn't even know existed, and that's definitely paying off for the Valiant. So I'm really happy to give them my number 10 spot on this power ranking. In number 9, finally getting into the really, really good teams, is going to be the Dallas Fuel. Now, in all honesty, the Valiant and the Fuel seem to be a bit interchangeable, but because the Fuel got that win over the Valiant, they did end up beating them in their game, they're going to go above the Valiant until I can see that the Valiant are winning games against the Fuel. If, say, in the next few weeks, we see the Valiant go up against the Fuel and completely demolish them, or even just win at a 3-2, then I could see the Valiant taking the number 9 spot and pushing Dallas down a spot. Coming up next on my number 8 position, kind of falling a little bit from number 6, I believe was the last place they put them in. I'd have to double check, I'm not sure. I believe I put these guys number 6, but the Los Angeles Gladiators kind of struggled a bit against the Defiant. That's kind of my reasoning for dropping them a little bit in the rankings. And because, they're still winning games, they're still playing really good Overwatch against some of these higher tier teams and against a lot of these lower tier teams, they still deserve the top 10. They still deserve number 8 position above the Fuel and the Valiant. I just think they don't deserve, number 6 or number 7 position anymore. So they're dropping a couple spots, not too bad, but still not that good. And now I'm looking at my rankings, and it's looking like Hangzhou Spark comes in at number 7. These guys had a heck of a game against Seoul. I don't know what else to say, but I mean, when you have a game that good against a team that we all thought was really good, I mean, at the time, you're looking at the game and you're looking at the scoreline and you're thinking, well, Seoul is supposed to be a good team. Hangzhou's wiping the floor with them, so number 7 position it is. Again, nothing too in-depth for why I'm putting them here. I just think they really deserve this higher spot. And so does the next Chinese team that I put on this list, the next couple Chinese teams. But above Hangzhou is going to be the Atlanta Reign. At one point, they were the number 4 team, then the number 5 team, and now they're number 6. And if they keep playing the way they do, they're going to fall 1 to 2 spots every week. I have no problem doing that. I feel they were a little bit overhyped. And the reason I say that is because if you're going against the Valiant, a game that everybody looked at the schedule and said, 3-0, including, if you guys go watch our predictions from last week, we thought the same thing. I mean, we were looking at this game, we said, that should be an easy game for them. There's no question how easy of a game it should be. It should be an easy 3-0 for the Reign, but the Valiant reverse swept them, and that's a bit disappointing if you're a Reign fan. That's a bit disappointing if you're the Reign team, because, I mean, you're consistently dropping spots if you keep losing to these teams that I believe are lower than you. Above them is going to be the Guangzhou Charge, another team that put up a great showing against Seoul, and unlike the Spark, they're seeming to be a little bit more consistent. They're seeming a little bit more confident when they play, so they go above the Spark and above the Reign in that manner. Top 4 teams now. Some of your best teams in the league are going to start off with the San Francisco Shock. What can I say about these guys? They've dealt with a lot. They lost Sinatra this week. They are coming back strong from it, though. They haven't looked like they've faltered in that manner. I mean, you lose your MVP, you expect maybe the team starts placing down here or right here in the power rankings, but because they showed prior to Sinatra's leaving that they didn't necessarily need him to play a good game, they haven't dropped any skill because of him. I mean, if you look at the lineup prior to his leaving, it was usually like Smurf or Super and Choi Hyobin, and then you had Violet and Moth for support. And then when you played DPS, you had like Striker, Rascal, and Ons taking on a lot of the work for your DPS line. And Sinatra just wasn't playing as much, so they were able to win games without him, and they're continuing to win games without him even available to them. Number 3 spot, these are your top 3 teams, are going to be New York Excelsior, Philadelphia Fusion, and Shanghai Dragons, in that order. So, why? Well, New York Excelsior, as soon as they made their debut in the Chinese region, or in the Asian region in general, began tearing through them. There was just no hope for any of these Asian teams once New York showed up. They've shown consistently good showings, and the only reason that they're number 3 and not number 1 is because of their loss to the Shanghai Dragons, which everybody assumed was going to happen. The Dragons are just one of your best teams in the Asian region. Actually, the best team in the Asian region. They've only lost 1 game, and they're continuing to stay on that tear. They haven't looked inconsistent. They haven't looked like they've faltered at all. So that's my reasoning for putting them there. And the Philadelphia Fusion are going to be put in the number 2 spot because they're the number 1 team in the Atlantic region, or in the American region, whatever you want to call it. I guess you could call it North American region, or you could call it Atlantic region. The names are kind of wonky right now, but they're the number 1 team in the Pacific region, and if you're not going to put your top 2 teams in the top 2 spots, then I don't know what you're doing with your power rankings. But yeah, that's going to be it for this week. You guys can take a look at my power rankings here, and go and check out last week's power rankings to see how they compare to this weekend. I think you're going to be pretty shocked some of the differences that I made, and compare them to some other people's power rankings, because these are definitely unique in their own right. They're definitely not the same as everybody else's, for sure. And that should make it pretty interesting. And make sure that you guys tune in to some of our casts on Mondays, and our predictions on Wednesdays, and of course the new tournament that we're going to be a part of for the next 2 to 3 weeks. I hope you guys are able to tune in there. But thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Spherno, and this has been the Fruit Bowl Cast. I will see you all in the next video. Adios.